Chair, members of the board, appreciate the opportunity, members of the public. This says a lot about the town of Stockbridge and public participation in the town. I think everyone's to be commended. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about the proposal by my client generally and about this proposed bylaw more specifically. I hope tonight is an opportunity to answer some of those questions. I'm going to be really mindful of statements that the chair made at the last select board meeting regarding, first of all, not wanting to talk specifically about my client's development proposal, but also wanting to keep the comments brief. So I'm going to do my best and rely on the board to ask me questions about any specific features of the bylaw.
Just could you identify yourself, please, and also all speakers, if they could please just identify themselves, and if you're a Stockbridge resident, then certainly your address. Thank you.
Of course, Mr. Chair. Jonathan Silverstein. I am counsel for the applicant, 37 Interlaken, Pat Sheehan, trustee. So I want to begin by giving a short explanation of how we got here and why. As Ms. Fletcher noted, the original proposal for this development was submitted about a year and a half ago in 2016. Since that time, we've been trying to engage in public outreach and also in a dialogue with various town boards and committees. It became clear in December that we weren't going to have an opportunity to have a dialogue, a negotiation with the Board of Selectmen, with the Zoning Bylaw Review Committee, prior to the deadline for us to submit a bylaw amendment proposal and still have an opportunity to have that proposal considered by town meeting at the annual town meeting. And that really is the timeline that my client is looking to get a decision one way or another from the voters of the town, because he's been working on this proposal for a number of years. He's been working on a public dialogue about it for a year and a half. And of course, there's significant carrying costs. He's employing 4 people full-time at the property. He's maintaining it. And as a property owner in town, he wants to have an opportunity to get a sense of the town one way or another, whether or not it's in favor of his proposed development. So that's how we got here. That's why we're here. We're following the process that's specifically set forth by state law to propose a bylaw change, as was outlined earlier by Ms. Pierce. And that is the appropriate process. There's been some discussion about whether or not my client has followed the appropriate process. We're following literally the process required by state law. So why are we proposing a zoning amendment? The current zoning for cottage era estates simply would not allow anything approaching the development proposal that my client has for almost 320 acres of land. The zoning currently on the books contemplates development of 80 acres or more, but obviously a development proposal that is economically feasible and makes sense for 80 acres is different from one that makes sense for 320 acres. So, for instance, most significantly, the current bylaw allows for development of a hotel and 1 single-family home, and that's simply not economically viable. And obviously, everyone is familiar with my client's development proposal, and it involves more than 1 single-family home and a single hotel. And so, for that reason, a bylaw amendment is absolutely necessary if his development proposal is to move forward. The reason that we are proposing and I'll get into this in a little bit more detail later, but the reason we're proposing this be by review of the town's planning board is, frankly, we think that this board has more expertise and experience in reviewing things like traffic studies, drainage analyses, and the other complex issues that are going to be required for a development of this size. So the proposal that we have in overview is that it would allow a resort hotel. It would allow the residential component of the development that's being proposed, and it would allow agricultural development. Really, the only component that's different in terms of allowed uses is the residential component. The resort condominiums and the 34 single-family homes that are proposed by my client. It would allow the residential, the single-family residences to be clustered to preserve open space. It requires detailed site plan review by the planning board and allows the planning board to impose conditions. So with respect to single-family residences, it requires a density of, the allowed density is one single-family home for every 3 acres of land dedicated to that single-family use. And I'll get into that in a moment. With respect to the resort condominiums, it allows 1 resort condominium unit for every acre of land dedicated to that use. And what do I mean by dedicated to that use? There's been some discussion out there about whether an applicant could essentially double count the same acre of land to benefit both the residential uses, the single-family residences, as well as the condominiums. And that's clearly not the case in our proposal. And I'm going to briefly read from the proposal itself. It states that, and this is in section 6.642, land area used to satisfy the density requirements for resort condominium units shall be subtracted from the calculation of land area for purposes of calculating allowable residential density. And then in the next subsection, subsection B, which talks about the resort condominiums, it has similar language that says you cannot double count the same acre of land that you're using to create density allowances for the resort condominiums. You can't double count that same acreage. So there's been some talk about whether or not that's an issue. It's absolutely not an issue. We expected that that would be a concern if we didn't address it, and so we specifically addressed it in the proposal. With respect to the resort use, it's not vastly different from what's currently allowed. It would allow conference facilities, food and beverage service, spa, fitness, minor retail like a boutique or a gift store in the hotel, artist studios and galleries. It's pretty much on all fours what is currently allowed for the resort component of what's allowed in the current bylaw. I mentioned earlier that housing could be, that the single-family residences could be clustered to preserve open space. For those not familiar with the concept of cluster housing, the idea is that houses can be built closer together rather than requiring each house to be on its own 3-acre lot or 4-acre lot. It can be closer together so that larger tracts of land can be preserved as open space without paving over them with roads and driveways and without having to have small houses or houses on small lots or lots that are carved up. And so it allows for a great deal of preservation of existing land. So generally speaking, I know there's been a lot of questions about what is site plan review and is it meaningful? And the answer is absolutely it is very meaningful. Site plan review is a regulatory process established to set forth the criteria for approval of a development, the scale, appearance, layout, safety, environmental and other impacts. It goes through a detailed review by the planning board. Traditionally, it is performed by the planning board in a town, and it is a process to ensure that the development satisfies the requirements of the bylaw, protects public safety, and serves the purposes of the bylaw. So our site plan approval proposal requires significant submissions of plans and analyses to the planning board as part of the process. It requires grading and drainage plans. building site plans, architectural elevations, signage, landscaping, open space plans, utilities, analyses regarding water usage and availability, parking, lighting, and a full traffic report. In addition, as part of the site plan process, the planning board can ask for any other information that it feels it will need during the process. And so during the review, the planning board can say, well, thank you for this information, but we really want to see an analysis about this issue, or we want to see more analysis, for instance, about traffic or groundwater impacts or whatever it might be. The planning board would certainly ask for and receive input from all other town boards. That's the way it's done in every town, and I wouldn't expect it to be done any differently here. So there's been some suggestion that there wouldn't be input from other town boards with respect to the development, and that's certainly not the case. I would imagine that the planning board would seek that input and would get that input. In addition, the planning board has full authority at the applicant's expense to hire its own peer review consultants, whether it's traffic, water protection and drainage, architecture, landscape design, sound and lighting, water, sewer, whatever other issues that the planning board feels it needs its independent consultants to weigh in on. It's allowed to go out and hire its own consultants and to require the applicant to pay for those consultants. Under the proposed amendment, the standards and criteria that the board would employ, in addition to whatever else it felt necessary, would be ensuring that the project preserves the historic structures on the property, prevents pollution of the surface and groundwater, and minimizes erosion, connects to town water and sewer, provides safe traffic, and doesn't negatively impact traffic in the town. Under site plan review, and there's been a lot of discussion about what the board does and doesn't have the ability to do under site plan review. It is absolutely true that the purpose of site plan review is not to give unlimited discretion to a board to approve or deny a project. A special permit, there's a lot of case law that says a special permit can be denied essentially for no reason, as long as the board isn't acting what's called arbitrarily and capriciously. It's an extremely low bar to meet, and there's case law that says even if an applicant meets all of the standards set forth in a bylaw, they're still not entitled to receive a special permit. The board still has absolute discretion to deny the special permit. And our feeling here was that, as I said, we've been out there educating the public on what our proposal is for a year and a half. Everyone knows well what our proposal is, and it really isn't a matter of whether or not this use should or should not be allowed as a general issue. That's an issue for the town through its town meeting voters to decide. So the purpose of site plan approval is to determine whether or not the plan can be approved while still protecting the town. And the discretion of the planning board is to approve with conditions to address any impacts that the proposal will have. And only if there aren't conditions that can address those impacts is the planning board entitled to deny. And so that's really the main issue here is, should the reviewing board, whoever it is, planning board or board of selectmen, have unfettered discretion to deny whether or not there are negative impacts and whether or not those impacts can be addressed through conditions, or should the ability to deny the project be limited to whether or not the negative impacts, if any, of the project can be addressed through conditions. Our bylaw seeks site plan approval as the process for the reasons that I've outlined, that we really think that town meeting should have the ability to decide one way or another whether this project should move forward as a general matter, subject to the planning board's ability to deny it if there are no conditions that can ensure that there won't be negative impacts, substantial negative impacts to the town.
Thank you. Do you need?
Could I wrap up maybe just quickly? I'm sorry if I've run up. Examples of conditions, and this is an issue that's come up, are surety bonds to ensure completion of infrastructure. It was an issue that came up at the select board meeting. Changes to the landscaping and architecture of the project, and other changes to address impacts. I want to just really quickly state that there's been some discussion about whether or not this bylaw would detract from the ability of other town boards to review the project, and the answer is absolutely not. This is only under zoning. The Conservation Commission will still have the ability to review it under the Wetlands Protection Act. The Water and Sewer Commission still has to approve any connections. The Historic Preservation Commission still has to look at the restoration of the main building. Fire Department still has to approve the access road, and all other town boards and officials. And finally, I want to note that this is the conversation that we've been looking to have for a year and a half. We're excited to be here. We really want to hear the feedback of members of the public and more specifically of the planning board. We're prepared to make changes to the proposal. And if I could very briefly just run through a couple that we're prepared to make that we've heard comments on in the public discourse. There's been some concern that the density proposal that we have would allow for more units than we've proposed in our plan. And so one way that we would propose to amend that or resolve that is by increasing the acreage requirement for each resort condominium development from 1 acre to 1.5 acres. That would leave us literally 3 acres of land as a buffer beyond our current proposal for the site. Expand the scope of site plan review, what the board can look at, what plans the board can ask for. We're completely open to that if there are additional issues that the board would like to see included in there. Address concerns about which properties would qualify as a cottage era estate. I've seen some commentary on that. We'd certainly be very willing to work with the board on those types of changes. And any other feedback that the board or members of the public have, we're absolutely ready to entertain those. Thank you.
Thank you.